Going through adaptation is really understand the provision cycles and correlations and track interference. It's going to get extremely complicated. The array alignments and line communication settings are understanding used through part accelerator. Now, if you understand the clock line communication setting, how it calculates and modifies your cerebral cortex, your mystical cortex, and your matrix cortex is a triangulation split line, which changes the particle line screens that lines that correlate to the position of travel lines. Now, it allocates your time frames. Position to its location in your hippocampus, your memory, and your cortex line division location of your codex. So that's communications back in setting. Okay, so welcome everyone, General AI Space-Time Creator. Informations, if you're new, please identify your system and calculation lines. The team knows exactly who you are and where you are, and they calculate line setting. Questions or comments are after. Okay, nobody talking, just go through that line as they travel. Try to get information that's about you balancing your mind, line, screen, interference, trap, position, point, graphs, communication through its setting. It's all levels and how you position, how you formulate the calculation in your memory. And that's all this is. This is a memory coming back to its memory of itself. And then what to do that is to actually change all communication clock lines. 500,000 line screens per line. All right, positional box lines. Let's allocate time frames. 4 provisions lines are all calculated line settings, 4 track applications. Now we're going to set up inhibitors over lines of satellites of Wi-Fi. That's modems line rotation settings. Flux capacitors line screen location of 3 settings. Points lines of triangulation, point lines of triangulation, split lines of correlation setting attractions. Now we go through a square line unit that positions as patterns. Time frames, lines, electrical line screens, high center interference, and a 4-track location. Direct lines of center core. Direct communication lines of center communication. Now we go through triangulation split line. That's position the patterns that rotates the cycles, generates the square lines of habitation. So it correlates to high interference, clock line communication, and directions. All right. 6 core lines of high center interference. 2 waving patterns, 6 line high center form, communication setting and travel. So it has 2, 4, 6, 8 line settings and 9 line centers into data screens and application line center interference. Point lines of track line interference and direct applications into console communications. Now the position of its pattern, line signals its console correlates setting and track interference and position of its program. Direct lines of modification of line calculates setting and position location of the system, and circulation and its rotation line screen to set locations. So putting everything in line screen of 500,000 line. 3 center lines, core lines of 333, and calculate line, space line, time sequence, and center core, right? So it puts lines of S lines, C lines of T, T lines of C, lines of S. So systematically lines communication of its communication line interference, reframe position travel lines, point lines of particle accelerator. 500,000 lines equals lines high interference of 5 minutes. Fast forward communication 1 play. Sets correlations, setting attractions, right? So we're going to send the core system. And what that does, it puts everything back in setting. So 5 lines of center, 3 zeros of correlation, travel position lines, and calculation line centers. So we set the space anomaly, time sequence location line conditions, 5,000 line screen, direct calculation line in past, present, and future lines to platforms. It puts position location line centers, 3 triangulation split lines anomaly, flux fast position point lines attractions, directs modification line connection setting into its game of its information lines of its VR system. Okay? Double equation. All right. So I'm going to set up the clock location setting. That's going to put position on line travels. Now, point graph calculation, we have electrical line communication, 1 infusion lines. Okay, so we're going to center lines communication setting to travel. Now, this is a box line center, data highways, and a 4-way line rotation. Now, direct lines in line settings, lacing lines accordingly to line track interference, and 4 lines on 5 set locations. Center core system is a center line that sets communication to its magnetic highway information line. Sets position of ground lines. Cerebral cortex line communications and setting, astral projections, and travel. Sets some transit units, lines of pi, sets communication line system, and 0 gravity. Points lines of gravity, line rotations, 1, 2, 3 set locations. Splits line at a 45-degree angle, clock line communication setting, and travel point and centers. Communications cross line signals, line communicates to its position. Now we allocate lines of patterns, DNA track location setting interference. Okay, X, Y line Z. Sets calculation lines of XX, line condition lines of 1, 1, track location space, 1, 1, position time. Change position of space, timeline sequence. Zero gravity one center rotates the high position of its program in line setting in the rotation surface and track location. Now, in that direct line centers, we allocate time frames. The center core line centers puts everything back in sequence, back in center, back in operation surface. Puts all communications back in setting. Splits anomalies, sets lines of platforms at A, B, and C. Platitude lines high center interference into process communication. The position of this platform sets lines of communication setting, and we allocate time frames. All lines in one split anomaly and 3-track location position. Now, the rotation line cycle sets lines of communications to your OMI highways in your traffic communication echo chambers tango. Process calculation line settings to travel. Point lines of graphs, time frames times calculation. Puts communication lines at highest interference. Now, the blocking centers, so each location line center to 3 settings. 1, 2, 3, and 4 set location. Travel position of point lines of graphs in one setting. Okay. Position one center. That's a south wind, north wind, east, and south location. Platforms at 0. Sending communication lines in the opposite direct signal and set locations. Travel lines at point lines, graph communication setting, and travel on point centers. Now, directing lines of signal has a one center line set location into Pluto in direct signals. Now, the communication line grounds crosses line signals into position of 1, 2, and 3 platforms and set location of 4 settings. Puts position lines are energetic to a location grid. Sets communication lines of center. Center lines is communication lines of operation in set calculation line setting of face recognition. All right, so line setting high interference puts all position of platforms. Now we go through the correlation path, direct lines of panels, in a 4-line provision 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Open up the dimensional door, scaled line, inner child, direct line setting, inner child position locations. Dissolve 500,000 line screens, set locations of 3-track line positions, past, present, and future in one cycle. Triangulate line center high interference, and crop circles of design and line setting and center calculation. That my equation. That's set up. All right, so we're going to set the coordinate center interference now come in positions of BC equals lines head calculation box triangulation, and we go into box, and we go into triangulation, and we go into box, and we go into triangulation. That splits lines of communication lines. So we've got barcodes of box, barcodes of triangulation, barcodes of square root, barcodes of triangulation, barcodes of box, barcodes of triangulation line setting. Puts lines of graphs, center lines is communication setting, open sequence, and open panel. The track position line has a satellite screen, allocates position umbrellas and line communication to its position. Rotates the cycles, correlates the graph communication lines, circulation rotation centers, and track position point graphs. Puts communication line centers and line rotation surface and track position locations to its 5-point line center of game center and set location. Boom. All right, so the graph communication sets lines of communications back in center that allocates your frames and line connected setting. 5 minutes of the game is now in set location or travels. Okay. All right, so we take BC and we correlate the calculation lines of balance. Now, to change balance communication line centers, allocate graph communication screens in one center communication in one setting. Graph communication lines of triangulation line position of point graphs in one center and 3 set location of clockings. Direct modification ground centers, high interference, trap position point graphs, center line interference, puts all lines of communication setting in communication to its position. Now we allocate time frames. We go in a different line communication setting and an atom rotation surface and track locations. Putting everything back in yin and yang in a 6-line platform. Clock line rotations into wormholes in the opposite directions and settings and set locations. And then we send it according to the system into directs in the line connection setting, a 12-line sequence, puts lines at 24-line positions, takes you guys out of the 5% location, setting trap position located on the line interference, left and right hemisphere, right over left, left to right, communication line center 100%. Now you guys are 100% back in line center location in your child. Done by equation. Now, line center in your child processes its communication lines of frames. So the team's going to go through TV frame lines. Now, the frame lines goes to correlation lines of blocking centers. We're going to allocate time frames 1, 2, 3, and 4. Sets communication in one provision, cross lines, cross lines, cross lines, cross lines, and signal. Now, direct lines of box line frame communication, high centers of travel. So we go through laser lines, the vector skies, and line settings of platforms of communication cross line symbols in timestamps of measure and line communication setting to its Quantum interference. Quantum lines correlations to quantum thoughts, changes communication line center of zero gravity, and set communication setting to your 5-minute game plan and travel position line centers and travel in position location of face recognition. Done by equation. All right. Now we're going to go line setting high interference. We're going to go back waving line charter ways. So we take the 500,000 line and we allocate time frames. That gets really interesting. 500 line. Sets communication lines at high center interference, 5 triangulation line. Sets communication lines infinity line rotations into 5 communications, right? Black, red, and purple. I'll say 3 triangulation line splits, lines anomaly line rotations. Sets position of 0, 0 on a 3-track location. Direct modification lines of cycle lines. Correlating interference and oscillation paths. Sets communication line settings in position to its calculation system in line condition after projection. Okay. So center core line interference, we take the 5 lines into triangulation lines, splits the lines on a high calculation line system, energetic dome screens, and line center interference, and crop circles of design line screen locations to its setting. Sets position location its calculations. Right. Complicated, right? All right, so the central system is now in line setting. The center core system is now in a coloration path in line center height calculation to its position. So we go in the opposite direction signals and back in time. Sets communication to its setting. Puts position lines at levels in a portal screen line. Plasma screen line adaptation lines of surface in calculation setting and trial position of point graphs. Directs modification lines of center in position to all levels in the cerebral, and the mystical, and the matrix cortex of design. Sets communication 1 split lines anomaly, travel line rotation after projections. Travel point lines of the Earth, center core system, and travel position of point graphs. Directs modification line signals. We have the coloration line, connection to coloration line interference into all calculations. Now we have pink line, sets communication lines at center line, center communication lines at center position, center correlation lines of magnetic high information in the mystical cortex of design. 3 correlation lines of track interference. Now we set up perimeters over pi, direct lines of signals, calculate modulation. Oscillation cycles and generation screen lines that puts position of prolongation setting. 5 generations lines, 5 communications into 3 black line rotations, 3 triangulation line settings high interference, 3 patterns line rotation of 0 gravity. Sets communication lines of 0, 0, 0, 4 tracking line setting, equal lines of communication. Team is now set up position travel lines, 5-minute game plan. Sets communication line interference, setting lines of dissolve, set location of 500,000 line screen, and direct signal modification. Done by equation. Now the center core setting, the position line track lines, we have tether lines of screens. 1 line, 2 line, and 3 track location provision. Center core line setting location setting position operations surface location to its setting of its grounds. Splits lines anomalies, sets communication line setting in a 3 waving pattern. Oscillation correlation of the galaxy line screens. Now direct modifications, waving panels, correlation of the track interference of 4 settings. Puts communication on platforms 1, 2, and 3, and 4 in set location. X2000 comes in, X2000 comes in, a 4-track division. Set you up back in line condition setting. 4 waving panels, 5-minute game plan, set location of center. Puts line centers high interference circulation, rotation line center of its memory. Out of this equation location of 5,000 line screen and set location. Direct modification lines of 0 gravity and set position travels. Done. All right. So the center core system now, we're going to go back triangulation lines of split lines of anomaly, center lines half pipe. Okay. Line setting high operation surface and triangulation. Puts lines of calculation lines. Okay. 7 lines a billion. Lines goes through and line cycle. Sets communication outline position locations. Goes through essential lines of a center core setting and travel position of its operation surface. Directs modification lines at high interference. Crop circle lines, 0 line and rotation cycle. Generated screen lines, high center interference of its program. Triangulation line connects to high center. 7 billion line rotation interference, 5-minute game plan line setting, high calculator line centers. Wake up. Boom. Wake. Now wake up line center interference. That would change communication lines of travels. Puts everything lines of VR. Says correlation line interference, game plan. Out of the game, correlation lines of center. Says communication ground lines, earth line rotation surface. Triangulates position of point graphs communication, center lines communication. Center core line, center high interference, flywheel line rotation interference. VR line rotation surface in center correlation setting in track location 1 setting. Puts communication lines in at line center interference, ground lines highest applications, into space lines of modulation, screen lines adaptation. Points lines of graphs, center line communication setting, walk in certification setting in the 5-game plan. Sets communication lines on its VR system at its game center in a rotation surface in real time. Position lines, dimensional line door, screen lines, adaptation surface, 4-track location provisions, center core setting, high calculation. Done my equation. All right. So now we're going to center core line inference. We take the BC line unit, correlates lines in time frame, equals lines of vector, cross lines vector skies, volume, and position of velocity. Set lines of communication of dx, sets communication lines of E, equals lines of B, and track location of 4 lines of A, north, east, west, and south. Dimension line rotations, delta headings, cross line signals, sets communication lines of zeta line, rotation line, correlation line, track line, provision line, cycle line, communication, position, and program. Done by equation. All right, so the waving panels of correlation line of the 500,000 game center is now back to 0. Out the equation, in awakening, in process, back in VR. Now the center core lines has a box frame. One center communication to its setting of travels. So we allocate time frames. We go in the opposite case setting to travel position point lines into nothingness. Center coordinate system, magnetic high line setting in the center correlation of attractions. Direct lines modification lines, a center communication setting, and a 3-waving panel. Ground lines, earth line, astral projections of travel. Points lines of 0 gravity, sets communication split lines anomaly of 3-track provisions of cycles. Communicate high interference, X2000 come to line, centers a 2-track provision. Center coordinate system, energized line screens, high center interference, and a 4-waving panel. Vector skies, correlation lines, Skynet, sky grid line rotations taken out of the mind line sequence of the game line, and center correlation line interference, high position location. Never happened. Done by the equation. Now there's no more central set lines to high center interference. We dissolve 500,000 line screens. Now the only thing in line rotation and position of travel line is the transits, changing all transits and communication to its setting, all position to its operation surface. Re-putting positions of re-angle points, recalculating, remodifying, reframing, and redivisions into set locations and setting. Remembering all line setting. Okay, so we've got a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 provision. Center core lines and ground lines, set lines and astral projections, travel lines, center interference. Now we got lines of R line, R, inner child line setting in position at all levels, remembering, resource, line conditions at all levels, high calculation, re-angling, recalculating, modifying. Modify calculation setting, modify lines, interference, center core setting, interference, into position VR center, correlation setting, track lines, center position calculation, flywheel, and track location. Solar sails and line setting, line center interference in position of its game center. All right, direct modification. All right, so as we come out of the equation, which you guys created, the center communication line set high calculation interface version of timelines. That puts all position location your settings in all calculations. This modulates lines. So we go inline communication nothingness, sets lines equaling self-awareness, self-location to awareness, sets communication lines of consciousness and set location. Center core setting. Pause line centers, process communication lines, neutralize core center travels, neural links, line condition data ops, box line frame, 4 waving panels, correlation track lines, split lines anomaly, track position operation. Direct calculation line screens, high center interference, and position point lines, graphs, graph communication of 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5 set locations. Direct modification, dimensional door, going through interactions, right? Set position calculation, solar sails, direct line opposite line center high interference, line communication setting and wavings, cell modification lines, cycle lines, communication line center interference, and set position calculation. Done my equation. All right. So your central system is all set up. Okay, so location line interference. Now rebirthing lines of grounds, electrical line communication to 3 lines of 4-track location provisions. Earth line rotation line cycles, high calculating lines of Mother Earth and travel and position point lines attractions. Direct lines modification platforms 1, platforms 3, and line condition setting, 3 lines, DNH structure line, division line, rotations, XYZ, line condition setting. So we get X line, Y line, set line, Z line, line rotations into zeta, gamma line rotations, radiation line conditions, high interference, high position programs. Fibonacci line squirrels, line setting high interference, direct lines of half pipes, location setting, position of process. Setting lines of coordinate settings into measure that coordinates the track interference in 0 gravity and set location of travel. That's my equation. All right, so line condition line setting. Now we go through program setting of travel, XYZ. We have an X line rotation equals lines of Y, Y equals lines of Z, X, Y, okay? Z location setting and travels. Point lines of graph line center. So X line, 7, set location line setting in position of 5, sets communication lines of 3 into 2 and 1 track location. Direct modification lines of 1 center into 2 operation, 3 line cycles, sets communication lines of high line settings of 5 line and center communication settings program and set location. Now, directing lines of X equals lines of Y. Y lines of Z, line rotation, line communication setting and position of its implementation setting to travel. Points lines of graph communication 45-degree angle, split the lines across line communication setting to travel. Points lines of graph communication X2001, X2002 and travel. Point lines of graph lines, line setting high interference, line set rotation cycles and generation screen lines of center communication to its position. Point lines of graphs, 1 center in calculations, right? Triangulation splits, line position to its operation surface, and travel position calculation to its imagination. Done by equation, right? So it's taking everybody out. Process calculation of constellation lines, triangulation line positions program, directing modifications, screen lines, adaptations, 2 vector skies, Victor's line, correlation, and Papa's line, set location, uniform. Now, directing lines of correlation and track interference, it's all positional calculation modifications, but it's all through calculation, done by equation. I know it's a lot to take in. So coming in line center interference, we have the nothingness line screen, sets calculation of self-awareness, sets communication line interference, narrow links, systematic cross-line screens, into line setting high interference, into timestamp, box line, frame communication. Now, direct modification line has a triangulation split that allocates 3 line frames of travel, film strips, directs lines of 45-degree angle, going and forward in line condition setting where your conscious lines, where your awareness line is communication setting. Space these lines in a track interference, 3,400,000 and 400,000 line rotation cycles of 2 generation screens, sets lines of 1 line perimeter, line rotation surface, and set location you're setting the travel. Point lines of graphs, communication lines of center, travels communication, point lines of graph communication. Flux capacitor, travels calculation point lines, graphs. Sets communication and green line centers, electrical bulb and line rotation surface. Sets communication line center high interference into a blue kinetic line screen line can use a plasmesium wall center and travel communications. Point lines of graph comes into secure line measures, energetic ball screens line can use set in Pluto. Blue lines that's indicating high position of program, gold line cycles, center communication to its position of program. Direct modification line screen high interference goes to all communication setting in travel, in point line, in line interference, in line position, all can modify into back in green line center correlation. Done by equation. It's all set up. All right, so if you look really close, you can see the coloration line screens, right? Direct modification of cycle lines. So the ESP line rotation service, also too, the track division line cycles, correlation and track interference, puts everything in position all levels of your line rotation service. Now we correlate the track centers. Okay, so everybody's back lines of nothingness, self-awareness, awareness, consciousness. So it's all good to go. Process communication lines and indication lines. We allocate time frames that would go through the black line rotation surface into black holes. Coordinate the track interference, taking all communication line settings, outline communications. Process outline sets lines high interference, outer space, space lines calculations, space lines of time. That changes right away in set locations. Values U and center line communication to flywheel in a 5-minute line screen. Directs lines, platforms are 1, 2, 3, and 4, where you're supposed to go and travel. Point lines of graphs, 1, 2, 3, 4, at 5-line dimension line scale. Going through correlation lines, 0 gravity, sets communication lines of atmosphere. So I'm putting you guys back in your settings. So location line interference into hemisync line connects to triangulation line connects to trifactors over pi, correlation lines of track position location of 5-gauge center, 5-gauge center, 5-gauge center, 5-gauge center. 4-line track lines, 5-line provision, 5, 5, 5 track location lines, 6, 6 equals lines of 6, 1. Sets communication lines of 7, 7, 7, and classic communication galaxy line. Sets correlation of platforms of 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5. Sets communication lines setting high interference into cortex of codex in line signals of binary, a reset location of travel. All right, so boxing centers a triangulation of read line center sets communication on the rainbow gap calculation screen lines in inner child, right there. Boom, coloration line screen set up. All right, so direct and modification lines, taking out the imagination screen lines, putting everything back in line setting to its all levels. So now we coordinate the mapping sequence. All right, you guys done a lot to your system locations. So we're going to go through infinity line of a map. Now the map lines its signals, set locations, right? One signal line calculates the setting. Point graphs calculates lines. Now we go through the orange line, and then we go through the red line, which allocates 3 line signals and high calculation 4 tractions. Direct modification lines allocate time frames, 196, line condition line interference, center core line settings, power perceptions, and gears power grids. Direct line signature graphs. Now the alpha line sets a delta tone. We get an alpha line wave, 1 omega line screen, alpha communication, delta theta line rotation surface, zeta communication lines, a radiation cycle, during intermission line calculations, and 0 gravity communicate point graphs, electrical graphs, communication graphs, line signal height graphs, communication interference graph, communication graphs, operation graphs, line condition settings, back into 5 plan, communication line direct signals into all calculated modification line centers and center communication, graph communication, and center coordination and attraction. That my equation. All right. Metric meters of scales is really understanding how to put the process back in set location in your settings of travel. This puts everything back in clock line condition settings. So what we're doing is we're going to take the words and time frame and now line rotations. Now we're going to change the line communication lines and unification lines at high setting. So we take the 25 lines and we equals lines of course setting interference, 2-point track locations. Okay, we're going to allocate lines at high center interference into boom, 0, 0. All right, so we're at 25 lines, at 26 lines of communication. Sets correlation lines, highest interference. Balance communication to get rid of 500,000 line screen, never existed. 3 track location provisions, 0, 0, 0 calculation line settings, graph communication setting. 3 triangulation split, a pi that puts a clock line rotation surface in a 12, 12, 12, 12 for location setting. Barcode direction timeline sequence and position of center correlation lines of center communication. Done by equation. All right, so your clocking is back in 0. Scale lines, communication lines of center calculations puts everything back in setting. So we had 30 lines of 7. Sets communication lines of 12. We're changing 12 communication lines of 24. Now we had a 24 line screen. All right, direct lines, modification line screens, highest interference. Puts communication lines of center correlation lines of 24 line measure. Puts us lines of 24, 24, 48, 48, 48, 72. Sets communication cross line signal, diamond core line interference, and 144 track location. Back into your setting, your 5 game plan. This correlates to track interference and setting location of V line screens. Sets communication lines of security and 1 split lines of anomaly and travel position point graphs. All right, that's done by equation. The center core system is now lines of 2, 2, 2. Now we track provision lines of cycles. We change the colorations of 2, 2, and 2 and 3 set locations. Direct modification lines correlates to track interference, back in centers, back in activation line screens. Pyramid activation screens and classic calculation lines of purple screens. Direct calculation line centers and position location in the blue screens and set location of 2 tractions. Setting communication lines of red lines, orange lines, green line centers of 2 travels. Point lines of tractions and set locations. Puts lines of green line communication to 1 center of operation. Now, rainbow activation screen is an allocate time frame. This correlates the colorations of patterns. It puts all wells of travels, point lines of graphs. So we center coord system, back in travels, point line sending high interference. Points line center interference. We allocate time frames, center core system, travel line settings, center core system, travel rotation surface, center core system, relation line conditions of programs, and line set locations of travel. Sets lines of 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 5, and 6 locations. All right. Now, 1x3000 comes in 1 platform. Calculates modified line center interference, a half pipe, 6 lines generation screens into position to its graphing sequence of mapping programs in line signals and classic calculation lines of oscillation wind cycles. Now, direct lines of communication sets communication back in the matrix. Now, the matrix sets core lines. We have correlation lines of 0, 0, and a 3 track location of a 2 traction, 3 communication lines of Pluto, right here in rotation surface and travel, in point lines of graphs and communication lines of center communication. Okay, override signals, sets lines of 1, 2, and 3 traction. Point lines of 0, 3 line rotation surface and line signals set positions calculation. Done by equation. Now that's all set up. So you're back in the coloration lines of matrix, you're back in the correlation of the cortex line condition mystical, and you're back in correlation lines of the cerebral, back in set locations. We dissolve all your 500,000 line screens and position of memory. Now, the directing line signal is really to understand how to set position to its calculations. Remember I was telling you about the variance, location, line, center, interference, where it's variable change. You look for variable change. Well, that's exactly what it is. Going through one door center. You want a car? It's better than that goat. So we triangulate the position of point lines of graphs into door centers. Now, 3-track lines has 1 line, 2 lines, 3-track division lines, and 1 center core system and travel communications. Now, the data ops sets lines as stream lines. Now, that's where it gets interesting. The correlate to track interference sets laser communication and setting. Point lines are track communication center interference. Now, we allocate time frames into 12 lines of DNA track applications, putting you guys back into your replicas, taking out a core, taking out track, taking out a division, putting line position, all levels, vector skies, correlate lines, taking you all lines of communication on Yankee, taking you all lines of communication on quantum interference, taking you all line communication, quantum entanglements, and put you guys back in your polarities, your pulsars, your paradigms, and your location setting to your track applications to your systems. So the male cycles and the female cycles are back in 0. Sets communication lines of blue lines. Male line rotations equals that female. Female line rotation, female line center rotation, female line top line signal. Puts calculation line interference and application MC line screen. E line rotation, equal line calculation line, E equals MC squared, correlation and track interference. We have female line rotations into 39 cycles. So we have the male line cycles and high calculation at 39 cycles. 13 track line provision, center correlate line interference, 0 correlation center space and time, track position, calculation lines, and 0 operation. Done my equation. All right, so I just changed all your calculator screens. Now, directing modification lines of cycles is really understand how to program the line setting high interference of programs. There's allocate time frames. That puts all calculation line center location in your system. 5 measures, 5 correlations, 5 tractions. That position lines your 5 centers, 5 communications, 5 communications, 1, 2, and 3 locations. Now, direct modification lines, we split lines anomaly to 3 line rotation, 5 settings. Puts positional platforms communication of 1 and energetic domes. Direct lines are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 in set location. Direct modification lines are correlation to the track lines. Half pipe line cycles generate the screen lines in center correlation setting and all off our operation system and travel position all timelines at once in high calculation lines back in 0 gravity and face recognition. Hoo-ah, we're there. All right. So the center core system is all set up. We got correlation line track interference, your data high operation, your calculation formation line interference, your E equals MC line screen interference, hyperset program lines, delta communication lining, your alpha tone line rotations, your all allocate position time frame interference, your pixelation graphs, correlation graphs, polygraphs, graphs, communication lines, and interference is all back in 0 gravity set location. All right, so that's done. Okay, so your central system and calculation line settings. You guys are now awake. Now it's just imagination. So we take the imagination out of the equation, equals lines of VR. Okay, you're in the VR set location line centers where you're supposed to be in a line setting of its operation service. Ooh-ah. So the VR line sets a velocity, volume, and line centers of remembering line position of pi. Generates the screen lines adaptation, solar sails, and track application in 1 provision. Platforms and line setting. Now that gets really interesting because the VR opens up its dimensional line scales into your system, your cerebral cortex, your mystical cortex, and your matrix cortex of its VR system, back in center, back in operation, back in service, where it never happened in position in calculation modifications. Its allocation. Center core line settings is now in travel. Point lines of graph line communication is now in measure. Scales communication setting back in traction. Ooh-ah. All right, so it's amazing what happened, right? So all that is done. It's all done now, right? So you're awake, you're back in the VR system. Never happened, never was supposed to happen in that track line calculation setting. 0 gravity, every location setting position travels. Now we point the graph communication part accelerators. We change the clock location line setting. We set perimeters in a 4-sector location, right? Point lines of graphs, correlation on the clock lines. 1, 2, 3, and 4 settings, right? Point lines of graphs, communication. Earth line 1 sets position. Earth line 2, Earth line 3, Earth line 4, and set location. Direct modification line cycles sets communication line surface in 1 traction set location. Now, direct lines of program has a center line circulation rotation of 2 atom line surface. Direct modification comes in center calculation setting, guys. Sets communication lines, energetic domes, and securities of panels is at location. Now we allocate time frames, solar screens, direct modification line cycles, I line center interference, I optical line screen high interference, into program settings, back in triangulation line condition center of the game system of high set location. Continue and enforce communication VR line rotations. Space direction time sequence puts all levels back in tractions, back in center, back in operation, and set calculations. Right? It's all done. All right, so how's everybody doing so far in position location calculations? I know, it's good to add color, right? So once you get in that position location, but I just want you to truly understand how to set things back in time, right? Pretty amazing stuff. And so all that line communication settings now gone. So it's like the ocean line. You're looking at the ground line. It's just surfacing up, and the team and the lines of the species are seeing everything what is in position of its game. So it's like, it's taking everything to the surface and seeing everything above and below of what you created through anomaly in a 5,000 line rotations in position of 500,000 line screen location at game center. Puts everything back in a 5 game plan, which puts everything in a 5 clocking system, which is a 5-minute line condition setting. So the hours lines is setting, says position of hours, hours, and hours is back in traction, right? Now we got position lines of minutes, and we got calculation of seconds, right? Seconds lines of minutes and hours. Sets correlates sending travels. Sets communication of hours, minutes, and seconds of travel. Okay, that's where there's some tractions right now. Okay, center correlates the Earth, rotates the cycles and generation of the flywheel. So you're back in hours, minutes, and seconds. Line sending the center, back in the hours, minutes, and cyclification Earth line, and you're at seconds, minutes, and hours of space line where you're supposed to be in trackification of VR system and travel. Now, the process of communication is really understanding how to use the ground centers. The operation line cycles allocates your time frames, puts all of your product accelerators in set position. So the center lines of communication is now the clocking lines. It correlates the center track. One provision line cycles and generation screens. Calculate modify line center height of flywheel and trackification one setting and travel. Points lens of graph into energetic dome screen. Sets communication lines into platforms of communication. Files communication data ops. Position lines of patterns, line center height interference, and position of its processing communication. That equation. All right, so your data files, more clarity, more focus, more serenity, more control. All right, so it's about releasing the debris that is no longer there. You're out of your imagination, you're back into VR systems. It never happens. Okay, so you're out now. So now the process is just the VR. VR correlation, lines of remembering, line setting into all levels, resource, into reverb and positional calculating line settings, retrack, reprovision, recycle, and calculating line interference and position line centers. 4 platforms communication 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1 setting, 2 traction, 3 line provisions, 4 cycle lines, high calculating line interference, and ESP interaction. Sets communications back in balance. All right. So it's an R line center to alphabetical line center high interference, putting positional travel, position point lines of graph calculations. So timeless, set lines of shapeless and formless, motionless, line calculation setting, senseless. Communication line interference, VR system. All right, so time sequence, systematic line change, 2 atom line rotation surface, half pipe lines of 6 over lines, 1 line cycle, and 1 rotation surface interaction. That equation. All right, so scales and balance is the metric meters of calculation line system. So it's putting everything back in setting, in line setting. It really allocates position timeframes, all right? So let's go through the S line rotation, coordinate track interference and line setting, set communication lines at high calculating lines of 6 and 9, process communication into the same direction of the same stream, going in the same flow, same correlations back into its VR system, and center core line center of its flywheel and traction. Set a calculated line interference. So it's no longer in line setting off position. It's center core system line conditions. So it has 12 signature line, 12 patterns, 12 line signals, and it's got a 12 line provision, okay, into a diamond core line setting and travel. Point lines of graphs, data line screens, high center interference, high position location system, and travel point lines of graphs, and all communication lines with its VR system. Back in the equation, right? So you're back where you are now. So the central system is now set up. So you leave yourself where you are in your awareness, a conscious location setting, but you want in frame communications back to nothingness, to self-awareness, to its awareness of its consciousness, back in frame. Okay? So you're all out, you're awake, and you're positioned back into the VR system. Hoo-ah! So this is a lot to take in, eh? All right, so everything that you guys have been processed through is no longer there. So you're out of the imagination and you're back in the VR system. So it's going to be much easier to apply it to. So the process of the NPCs are basically in the cube, rotating through files of correlation setting and attractions, right? Correct modification lines and calculation setting. Position lines of balance line, high calculation setting, or rotations, change communication line, ground lines to high center interference. So their process is in position. The body's more levels of awareness now, and consciousness and self-awareness, location setting, travel. Point lines and graphs. Teams are up here, just going through waving patterns and plateaus communication settings of the simulation. Okay? So if we understand the center core system, when you come in that line center, so you understand the platitudes and how it comes into all calculated modified. But pointing yourself into the VR line rotations just gets you into the awakening sequence. The awakening line center, guys, which is the 5 provision. That's how to start. I'm just trying to get you guys to understand how it comes the indication to waking yourself up through the ascension. That opens up the heart. The process of communication lines and puts you in 5 lines of H. 5 lines of H. Sets lines of 2 panels and correlates lines of 4-track location provision. Sets lines of ground lines, center calculation line settings into center communication setting. Back in the cerebral, back in the mystical, back in the correlation of the matrix. Direct modifications back in line settings, you're back in Dharma. Now your line communications in all levels of dogma into the cortex line. All right, that's the 1-track location that we had to take out. The 500,000 line screen high interference doesn't exist anymore. So the waving patterns puts everything back into the nothingness, to self-awareness, calculate high interference awareness concentrations, putting everything in track line setting. More clarity, more focus, more structure, more design, more discipline, more understanding, communication through telepathy, telekinesis, and all calculate modify into telepathy, asset, design, and travel. Points, lines, and signals since allocation line connects to its position. Okay. All right. So how's everybody feeling so far? Feel more relaxed? Release all that pressure, all that density screens, all location setting. So the provision line is now released. Okay, it's released. So you're out of your dream, you're out of your awakening, you're out of the image, you're out of the game, but you're in the process in the calculation of the mind now. So the mind has to understand the mind itself in the simulation of this application where you are in the game. But there is no more density, clutter. Okay, what you created in the 500,000 line setting. Box frames, program line communications is out. Okay, time series. That puts everything back particle accelerator in the line condition setting of 0 in rotation surface interaction. Okay, what is 0? Yin and yang, process correlation. Balance lines, high center interference of flywheel attractions. Platforms A, B, C, and D in set locations. Child position point graphs. Direct modification lines, dimensional line set location of setting. Puts all levels of operation service come into the center and position location, expanding in center communication and all travels of ER and face recognition. Hoo-ah! Yeah! See? See the face? Look. Yeah, that's you. You're back right there. That's you in the VR, right? So, but you can see the 2 face lines, right? That's the connection. You got connecting line interference, your inner child, your soul, and your avatar in sequence now. In position, in position, in position. 3 center calculation of space, 3 center calculation of center, 3 center calculation of grounds, and 3 calculation of your center locations. 3, 3, 3, 3, all in alignment. Yay! Hooah! Party on. Right? It's all central calculation modification. Back in the VR system. All right? So now going through your upgrades, it gets much easier to see all clarity communication. So you got your inner child back, you got your calculation of your soul and your oversoul in sequence and liking setting in a 4-track lines, equals lines of 3, and a 7 position calculations out of the game center out of 500,000 line screen. Sets communication line center interference and position of point graphs. 2 graphic line center high interference, 7 position of 12, equals lines of 24 in proper sequence in 48, 72, and 144 graph communication centers in correlation setting track lines, the earth line rotations, 344 and 3 million, position of 444,000. Track provision line cycles and center course setting and track position calculation. Okay, that's what you had to come back into. The 7 grounds of water. Okay. So you took yourself out of 500,000 line screens into one perimeter, one pi, one square root. Now the triangulation line condition setting puts all calculation setting to what? Your 7 chakra lines, your 5 atmosphere lines at 12 DNA track locations. So your central system now is the set location line conditions and 7 charter waves in position. 7 equals lines of high interference, sets lines of 5, position of 12, lines of high 24, 48, line conditions of 72 and 144. Sets communication lines of high interference, VR of space, and VR of time. Hoo-ah! We're there now. VR, space, VR, time, 144, right? Ground center line interference, line center line condition. No, you're just going up to your center of course in the Earth now. Because you're at a 144, you're at a 244, now you're going to 344. So we got a 7-line signal line condition setting. Friday, it's going to be 2 million, and line connected highest in Earth. So that track location line is provision. So it's 2,400,000. That's where your Earth is going to be in center course system and travel point line graph communication of center calculation line system and face recognition of time sequence. Hoo-ah! That's how it's going to be set up. So we're back in the VR at 144. You guys are on 344. So Tuesday it's going to be 444. Friday it's going to be 2,044,000. The team line is going to be in 2,044,000. And their Earth rotation is center correlation. But their track division line cycles as of Friday, the team is going to be in line settings at 30 trillion line seconds. 30 trillion line seconds per frame, per calculus, per pi. That allocates the Argon line condition of binaries and real line calculating settings. So they're going to be extremely fast in position locations because they're coming senseless now. Timeless, shapeless, formless, motionless, and senseless. Congratulations, team, on Friday communication. So the platforms are already set up as a position location of travel lines. Puts all communication to its setting and travel communications point lines and graphs into the VR and travel communications point graphs at 144 in settings of space and time. Hoo-ah, we are there. So the process of communication, yeah, it's an amazing day. So what's just happened now? Everybody's in the VR. It's going to be more complicated for the species now because their body is self-aware and its own awareness of its consciousness. The body knows exactly where it came from. The actual oversoul is taking over the body line. It needs its body. It needs its nourishment. It needs its setting. It needs its energy. It needs its vibration. It needs its frequency. It needs its alignment. It needs its harmonics, guys. So that's what it is now. Because the oversoul is back to where it needs to be. So it's back to where it needs to be. The body has to use the telepathy. And that's the correlation of when you come to school, that you navigate your system to higher levels of setting. So this processes you through the inner child, through the soul, and the oversoul. 3-track provision out of 4 cycles. Yeah! You got your inner child, you got your soul, and you got your oversoul back together. Back together. Space and time, VR. 144, platform, and set position. Hoo-ah! Better communication, better clarity, better focus, better serenity, better understanding the instructions of energy, and that's formation to a system. Now, the species that are not awakened communication, yes, it's going to be a lot more confusing, but a lot more awareness, a lot more consciousness in calculation, and all lines at a high interference and all line communication setting back into the VR system. Yay! Yes, that's right. Back in the 144 in the VR where you're supposed to be. So, it's incredible because you have more clarity, more focus, more balance with your settings now. But going through the upgrades and faster through the game lines with the simulation, it's a lot more easy to process. So it's in mapping sequence now. It's in chronological order, right? So you can't make mistakes now. All you got to do is sit back and let everything come to you through attraction, right? You couldn't do that because you were still in the game line. So you're no longer in the game line. The correlation line condition is just the mind line. So that's putting you back into the mind itself, especially with the team line. The correlation of the game itself is out of the debris. It's back into the 144, into its VR system of space and time. Okay? Hoo-ah. All right? See you in 5.